And I think the possibility of the suits and the victories that we won along the way seemed to us to justify settling the case so that the plaintiffs could get some measure of justice so that others in the Agoni could get some. And the case was really not about money. I mean, how much money would it take to either bankrupt Shell or to make them feel the pain financially? That really wasn't what it was about. And so we think that the settlement has actually contributed to this sort of growing accountability movement. And I'm sure that I'm coming close to my time now, so let me switch to apartheid quickly, because that's the sort of latest major litigation that's ongoing. Hopefully I'll have a chance to talk about some of the others again in the question period. The apartheid litigation started out as many cases suing dozens of corporations for their involvement in the apartheid system. And all of the cases were dismissed in 2004 on the basis that there was no such thing as aiding and abetting liability under the Alien Tort Statute, and that the only claim really was that these businesses were doing business in South Africa during apartheid and not a more narrow legal claim. We got that decision reversed in 2007 and said to the court that we would narrow our claims to make sure that they were within this international standard that the Unocal case had come up with about knowing practical assistance or encouragement that had a substantial effect on the commission of human rights violations. And so we filed new complaints against IBM, Daimler, and Ford. In the case of IBM, it's that the allegation is that they provided hardware and software that enabled the apartheid government to denationalize hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people to Bantustans. In the case of the automotive companies, Ford and Daimler, the argument is that they made specialized vehicles like Unimogs that were then used to suppress anti-apartheid activism and caused extrajudicial executions and other human rights violations. There's also an allegation that there was cooperation between the security apparatuses of the automotive companies and South African security to identify union activists and anti-apartheid activists for detention and torture. So these cases now have a much closer causal link in terms of the allegations between what the companies are alleged to have done and the particular plaintiffs that are seeking redress. I should note that one of the biggest issues in this case has always been the opposition of the South African government. From the beginning, the South African government and the United States government, which during the Bush administration went without saying, because the Bush administration was opposed to all of these cases vehemently. But the South African government was opposed to them as well on the grounds that it invaded South African sovereignty and interfered with the Truth and Reconciliation process. In a major development recently, because of the amended complaints and the more narrow focus of the case, the South African government submitted a letter to the court in September indicating that it did not have a problem with the case anymore, that New York was an appropriate forum to hear these cases, and that the South African government was interested in trying to facilitate a resolution of the cases if it could. And just this Monday, the Justice Department filed a brief on our side in a pending appeal in the case, which I'm still having a hard time getting used to, having my own government actually file something on my side is not something that's happened for a while. So it's obvious that elections sometimes do matter, and in this particular case, the United States government has now changed its position and seemingly is at least not antagonistic to the case and is supporting the South African government. So we're in a very interesting time with respect to the apartheid cases, where it's possible that there might be a process inspired by the South African government to resolve them in some way. We are going to have to deal, no doubt, with the defendants arguing that the new test for aiding and abetting means that our case has to be trimmed even further. So we're also in a period of uncertainty. But the truth be told, since 1980, when we started bringing these cases, we've been in a perpetual state of uncertainty. We've always, in the United States, bringing international human rights claims in courts is not something very usual, no matter which administration is in power. And I think Americans have a hard time coming to grips with the fact sometimes that international law exists. So we've had a hard slog on that. Okay, yes, okay. Oh. And in conclusion, why should U.S. courts play this kind of role in these kinds of cases? Well, my answer would be that in a perfect world, probably the United States courts shouldn't play as much of a role as they do in these kinds of cases. Because in a perfect world, there would be an international system of corporate accountability. And so you would have recourse to some international system where you could get redress, no matter what country you lived in, and no matter what corporation you were suing. But we bring these cases, as I indicated in the Unocal case, because there isn't that system yet. And in many, many countries, there's corporate impunity, not accountability. And so when human rights victims come to us, and there's a possibility of bringing suits in the United States to try to get some measure of justice for them, to try to get some attention to these problems, we take it up. And even though it seems sometimes like we're just pests hovering around gigantic companies, I am proud to be a pest and intend to continue to be a pest for as long as I can be. Thank you.
Paul, and as you suggested, there will be a chance to ask Paul questions a little later. I must say I hadn't heard before about this new ruling on intent, which strikes me as a very narrow one, but I also very much like your distinction between the sort of commercial concept of limited liability and universal human rights accountability. And I'm sure with your pesting people, the companies actually ultimately cannot look forward to impunity on these things. So terrific stuff. Thank you very much.